Thank you, everyone. Today is assumably the last of the series. We thought that this is a 23rd webinar series and 23rd episode. And we thought that since the wave is less, let us try to wind this up. But today's topic, according to us, is quite important. And can I have my next slide, please? Dr. Parikh sir and Dr. Tarini Sahu and myself, three of us are supposed to be program coordinators, but Tarini also would agree that majority of the work, planning and everything is done by Dr. Parikh sir. And we really enjoyed this. And I have the next slide, please. So today we have, faculty, Dr. Mukul Acharya is ENT surgeon, but virologist, at least for today. And we have Dr. Venkataraman Radhakrishnan, who's a medical and pediatric oncologist from Chennai. Dr. Khilnani sir, we can't thank you enough because all the education which you have imparted over last so many webinar series is amazing. And we really thank you for that. Dr. Chetan has been a regular visitor of our webinar series, and his inputs from Tata Hospital have been very helpful. Tarini I spoke about. We also have Dr. Vishu Bhasin. I don't know whether Dr. Vishu has joined or not. Dr. Vishu has joined? Yes, there Vishu is. Okay, perfect. Can we move to the slides back? Okay, perfect. So I am not missing out. Parikh sir is there. Parikh sir is there to give the final concluding comments. Next slide, please. So just wanted to, before we start our panel, I just wanted to share 3 or 4 facts which have come up in last 2 months. The first fact is FDA adds warning to COVID vaccines about the risk of heart inflammation. So there was a meeting about myocarditis, stroke pericarditis in young people. And what happened is that the CDC received 1,200 such reports out of 300 million doses of the 2 mRNA vaccines given. CDC confirmed 300 out of these 1,200 cases to be myocarditis, stroke pericarditis. And they also said that there is a likely association between mRNA vaccines and rare cases of heart inflammation. Almost all the cases resolved with little treatment and patients recovered quickly, but the benefits of vaccination outweigh the risk. Next slide, please. Fact number 2, and this is from UK, under 40s, people under 40s are to be offered alternative to AstraZeneca vaccine. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Yeah. So, and why? So most adults under the age of 40 will be given an alternative to Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine due to link with rare blood clots. Now I want you to go to the last paragraph where the risk of a clot is roughly 1 in 100,000 for people in their 40s, but 1 in 60,000 in people in their 30s. 2 in a million people in their 40s died, and this rose to 4 per million in their 30s. They died because of this complication. And as a result, the advisory was that adults aged 18 to 39 years with no underlying health conditions are offered an alternative to Oxford AstraZeneca if available and if it does not cause delays in having the vaccine. Next slide, please. Fact number 3. Now, this was told to me by Dr. Mukul, and in fact, Dr. Mukul has been one of the main brain behind today's webinar. And I searched for it, and Canada recommends mixing and matching AstraZeneca, Pfizer, and Moderna. And this is also a very interesting story. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Yeah, okay. So, National Advisory Committee on Immunization, they said that the first shot of AstraZeneca vaccine can be followed either by Moderna or Pfizer. But if somebody has taken Moderna or Pfizer Either they should take the same as a second dose or another mRNA vaccine as the second dose. They are not recommending AstraZeneca as the second dose in case if you have taken mRNA vaccine. Next slide, please. Indian data says the rare blood clot is 0.61 per million doses. Now, this is much, much lower compared to 4 cases per million doses, as reported by UK's regulator, MHRA. Next slide, please. So let us start with these facts. But before we start, I wanted that we must appreciate the seamless execution of each meeting by Kavina Creations. If we want professional services with no compromise in quality, Kavina Creations is the best. And I sincerely wanted to thank the entire team of Kavina Creations for working selflessly during this COVID times, true to each Indian citizen what is there. Next slide, please. Okay, so I wanted to start today by Dr. Mukul Acharya first, followed by Dr. Khilnani. All these facts, Dr. Mukul, do they trouble you, or you are happy that we are understanding vaccine area better?
Well, I think, yeah, we have seen, you have shown us some good data, some good slides about, the possible rare effects, adverse effects associated with the vaccine. But I think, you see, I definitely feel science has made an advancement, especially the immunology, microbiology part, when it comes to, vaccines against, all these sort of
Dr.
new
Mukul,
bugs
can I
which are
request you to
arising.
increase your volume a little bit?
Oh, okay, fine. Sorry, just give me a moment. If you can't hear me, let me.
No, we can hear you, but softly.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, now better. Now better.
Yeah, no. Is that better now?
Much better.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, sorry. I thought I would do without the headphones, but sorry, earphones. Right. Yeah. So I barring these sort of few side effects, which you know are sort of 1 in 100,000 to 1 in a million to 0.6 in a million. When it comes to clotting or myocarditis or some other side effects. What we have got is, vaccines which can be readily manufactured and most important tweaked when it comes to mutating viruses and viruses which form, variants at the drop of a hat. So we're talking about RNA viruses which are unstable. So actually, yes, I'm not really worried that about the side effects. What I'm more happy is we will be seeing more viruses tomorrow. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but we have seen COVID-19 today. Next year we may get another type of coronavirus or another RNA virus, and who knows? But at least now we've got quite a sound, technology which can produce vaccines, especially the mRNA vaccines, which we can manufacture quite quickly, tweak them if required, and use them to try and protect the masses, the population. So I'm not really worried. We can speak more about it, in the future.
Dr. Mukul, Khilnani sir, Dr. Mukul is not very much worried. Mortality because of this stroke is reported at 40%. Khilnani sir, are you worried?
Outside, thank you, Dr. Parekh and the team, for having me again. Actually, what has happened if you go into the history of vaccinations have never been 100% safe. And what has happened now that the data collection is very, very meticulous these days as compared to the olden times when smallpox vaccinations were given. When you inject a substance into the body and you generate an immune response, there are bound to be some reactions. Now, somebody complaining of chest pain, in our setting, in post-COVID setting, since we don't do MRI on them, tell them, no, it doesn't matter. It's a very common symptom. Now, here is the situation where after Pfizer vaccine or Moderna vaccine, you have started investigating these patients and found that some of them indeed have myocarditis and pericarditis based on troponin and all those things. Majority of them recover. That's what you made me read today a lot actually. So majority of them recover, majority of them, and without any event. Similarly, the clotting, and I saw you perspiring when we both went for vaccination. So Amish was perspiring. Sorry, I'm breaking the confidentiality. This is because you always feel that you are going to be among that 0.6 per million, and you might get a clot, and you might get a stroke. But the whole life is about the risk and benefit. You cross a road, are the chances of accident are 0%? No, they are not 0%. There's a one in maybe whatever the chance is there. So for the disease which is fatal, and if you find out the history of coronavirus, the SARS one had a mortality of 7 to 17%, and if you talk about 65 plus comorbidity, the mortality was more than 50%. So what we are up against is a disease which has a mortality of something like, even today it's about 3%. I don't believe it is 1% or something. So therefore, this risk is minuscule as compared to the benefit of it. But I'm sure with the course of time, the better combinations will come, and as we go on the discussion, we'll dissect it out. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Parekh sir has posted a question, which is also a statement that is the incidence of myocarditis more than that seen in the general population? Certainly not. It is the association, but not cause and effect. And I understand that Dr. Mukul and Dr. Khilnani both are also talking in the similar lines. Let's move forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so as Dr. Khilnani sir mentioned about, let's dissect it out. So 10th of June, NEJM has come out with this a small article, SARS-CoV-2 vaccine-induced immune thrombotic thrombocytopenia. The next slide, please. We have Dr. Tarini is going to join us little late. We have Dr. Tarini, no. Dr. Chetan or Dr. Venkat, any of you want to take this? What is vaccine-induced thrombotic thrombocytopenic purpura?
Yes, so I can go first. Basically what happens is when you give the vaccine, we don't know the exact mechanism, but we know that these are antibodies against platelet factor 4, and these are activating antibodies which cause activation of platelets. There is thrombosis and resultant consumption of platelets that leads to thrombocytopenia. So this is a well-known effect, well-known in the sense we have known about this effect with heparin, and now with heparin-induced thrombocytopenia, and now we see that with the COVID vaccines. More seen with the AstraZeneca or the Chad-Covax vector vaccine than the mRNA vaccines. And that's basically the mechanism. It is mostly seen in the younger population. That is why in your first slide that you mentioned that for 40-year-olds and younger, alternative vaccines are being offered. So that is true. But again, as we say that the incidence is far less than the incidence of clotting that we have seen with COVID itself.
Okay, so can I have the next slide, please? The only
I'd
issue.
just like to add. Can I add?
Yes, Venkat. Please, Venkat.
The sites of thrombosis is very unusual.
Right.
People have seen cerebral venous thrombosis (CVT), which is not classically seen with your usual barn door patients who are present with bleeding or thrombosis, and most of them respond very rapidly with either steroids or IVIG. The platelet count dramatically improves. So these are the 2 points I wanted to add.
Great, Venkat. You are absolutely right. But, all the clots, they have said right from very unusual sites to the very usual sites. They have found thrombosis in all sites. There is no predilection for a particular site, what I could read about it. So next slide, please. Vishu, Dr. Vishu Bhasin. I call him Vishu because he's a very close friend of mine. Pardon me for that. What are the lab parameters one looks in VITT?
Sir, the current studies, the NEJM document, there are only 4 things which they have stated so far. One is the platelet count, that establishing thrombocytopenia. There are high levels of D-dimer and very low levels of fibrinogen C. And as I mentioned, that establishing TF4 antibodies by ELISA is what requires to complete the diagnosis of VITT in a post vaccinated individuals.
Okay, perfect. So, Khilnani sir, your comments about VITT, clinical presentation, when should a patient who has taken vaccine, we do lab parameters only after they present to us in emergency. What are the time when one should be careful and suspect VITT? Because AstraZeneca vaccine is something which we all have taken, sir.
No, this is, I have no personal experience first. So whatever I'll be talking from, whatever you made me read today, is 2 to 4 days after it occurs more after the second dose. And of course, whatever Dr. Bhasin has described is absolutely accurate, but it's not indicated that you start doing platelet counts in all patients. Only people who are symptomatic should be tested for.
Right. Dr. Mukul, have you encountered any VITT clinical case? Can you shed some light about that? Because I think Dr. Venkat, Dr. Chetan, if any of you have seen in your practice, otherwise we can ask first Dr. Mukul and then move forward.
Yeah, you're right. I have actually seen not many, because there were not many cases, but I have seen a couple of cases in the Liverpool, Manchester region. Young, patients who were in their 40s who had AstraZeneca, and both of them had this complication after the second dose of AstraZeneca. It usually happens after 1 to 2 weeks of having had the second dose. As sir has rightly mentioned, so and mentioned by our other panelists, the incidence of cerebral venous thrombosis is the highest. It's about 156 or 168 cases, and then we've also seen some sort of splanchnic, thrombosis. Arterial thrombosis is not seen very frequently, though it can be seen, but arterial thrombosis is not as commonly seen. These are the patients who would present with headache, weakness, retroorbital pain. Sometimes, depending on the presence, they may have some neurological deficit. So the first thing to do is obviously admit the patient and do the investigation. So we've got a table chart which says certain values of raised D-dimers, fibrinogen low levels, and most important, either a platelet enhanced P4 antibody. So it's got platelet enhancement antibody, or it is a HIT, which is ELISA linked HIT, is what we do. The first thing to do is give them IV immunoglobulin, first and foremost, because this is an immune dependent phenomenon. So, and these are the patients who have not received heparin. These are the patients who have not received heparin, and yet we are seeing P4 antibodies against the P4 platelet factor. So this is more of an autoimmune linked, process which is happening. Is it because of the massive inflammation which the vaccine produces after the second dose, or is it because the vaccine itself acts against the platelet P4 antibodies, is against the P4 factor, is something which we are trying to find out. Whether this happens in those who have got thrombotic episodes in the past, no, not really. Because as you know, P4 antibodies are generally found after heparin, so that is called as a heparin dependent thrombotic event. But there are other things which can give rise to this type of process, which can happen with certain drugs. So even though the patient has not received heparin or vaccine, there are certain drugs which can give rise to that. So one is the pentosin polysulfate drug, and the other is chondroitin sulfate. And we see a lot of patients do use chondroitin sulfate for treating their osteoarthritis or for treating cataracts. And these are the patients who we have known to have such sort of autoimmune or spontaneous heparin induced thrombocytopenia is the exact the way you would define the vaccine induced, or autoimmune heparin induced thrombocytopenia, or heparin independent thrombocytopenia. So yeah, we treated this patient with IV immunoglobulin. Luckily there was no mortality, there was no residual neurological deficit, but we've seen 2 people in their 40s who actually passed away because of very bad cerebral venous thrombosis following AstraZeneca.
So, Dr. Mukul, if I remember or if I sum up correctly, those 2 people who died were normal people. They
Absolutely.
just went for vaccination and they died because of probable causal association of vaccination.
Probable causal association. But you see, my only point is, which I'm going to add. Hello, hello.
Yeah,
So,
yes.
so my only point is, you see, you look at the incidence of thrombosis following vaccine and look at the incidence of thrombosis following COVID-19. And the incidence of thrombotic events following COVID-19 is much, much way higher than that would happen with the vaccine. So I'm still very much an advocate of vaccine, AstraZeneca or otherwise.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Nobody is counting that. Will
Yeah.
Dr. Anil Singhvi has asked in the chat box, Dr. Mukul, do
Uh-huh.
any of the patients you have seen has elevated LDH?
Actually, that's a good question. And all these patients had raised D dimers, and low serum fibrinogen. The LDH levels, to my memory, if I can remember, was not really raised. No, it wasn't, because it was not a huge inflammatory phenomena. It was essentially just a thrombotic episode, with definitely very low platelets. So the platelets were below 150. I think one had platelets of 70 or 80, and the other had similar 30s or 40s.
Correct. So majority of the cases which I
Yeah.
read, platelets were in 30s and 40s.
Yes.
Dr. Vishu, if any of us see such patients and low fibrinogen, high D dimer, low platelet count, and vaccine second dose 5 days back, and we ask you for antibodies to P4 and platelet factor, do you have that in India?
Not yet, sir.
Not yet.
Not
Dr.
yet.
Chen,
Not even available for RU.
any of you know that how do we confirm VITT? Tomorrow, if we have given somebody the second dose and they come with such pictures, yes, Chetan.
Yeah, so I cannot say that I have seen a case, but as Dr. Vishu has already pointed out, just do a platelet count, get the fibrinogen D dimers, and there you give IVIG, as Dr. Mukul has mentioned. So that is the way I would go. Looking for platelet factor 4 and all, we can do that, but not wait for those results.
Not wait for that. Excellent. I think that makes a fair point. Next slide, please. Yes. So Dr. Mukul has already answered all these things. He also spoke about heparin. This was an NEJM paragraph which they had given, and you have already spoken. We can move to the next slide, please. I think Dr. Mukul also spoke about it. Dr. Khilnani, apart from steroids and IVIG, do you think that anything else we should try in VITT? Of course,
Not
ours
really.
is more of a theoretical knowledge.
Not really.
Not really. Dr. Venkat, steroids, early hospitalization, steroids, IVIG. Dr. Venkat, anything else you would like to add in the treatment of VITT?
I think those are the bread and butter, steroids and IVIG.
Steroids and IVIG. So I think the suspicion of VITT is number one important thing. Early hospitalization, looking after them well, and treating them with IVIG at the first suspicion. I think I would sum up VITT like that. The incidence is there, but the incidence is very, very rare compared to thrombosis because of COVID, and the lives saved because of vaccine much outweigh the risk associated with this particular complication. Next slide, please. Tarini has joined back. No. So anyway, we have discussed this. All the experts believe that benefits outweigh. Next slide, please. Okay. This particular slide, which I took, mainly just a little digression, Dr. Khilnani sir, WHO, 21st of June, they have printed on their website that we are calling G20 countries to embrace the target of at least 40% in every country by end 2021 and 60% by first half of 2022. With AstraZeneca telling in Europe that less than 40 try to avoid Covishield, we are left with Covaxin and Sputnik in younger population. Do you think we will achieve this?
Why you are asking me political questions? So this has been a debate on television among the politicians and administrators. So I think we will achieve that. The way the program is going on, I'm not talking about politics at all. The reason is that currently we started the 2 vaccines. Sputnik is already there, and Pfizer has got indemnity, and Cipla has taken this thing, collaborated with Moderna. So once these kind of agencies come into play, then I hope that in a month's time we'll have a, like you have a various, if you want to take ampicillin, there are several brands. So like for vaccine, you have several brands in the country, and with the the government pledging that 75% of the vaccines will be free of cost. And so I think, and then Covaxin production is proposed to be enhanced to great extent, and so is Covishield vaccine. So what I'm thinking that in a month's time, months later, we should be reaching 1 crore a day vaccination. That's what I think, and I'm not talking politics at all.
That's
And
great.
with that, we should be able to achieve this
You are
target.
right, sir. We have already crossed 10% of our population, and I'm sure we will cross this mark also very soon. Next slide, please.
Amish, if I could,
Yes,
I would-
Chetan, please
yeah.
go ahead.
Yeah, so I would like to ask if Mukul can shed some light on this, that Sputnik has not reported a lot of cases with thrombosis, but their vector is same. So would you think that Sputnik really has a lower risk of thrombosis as opposed to the AstraZeneca vaccine?
Excellent,
that-
Dr.
That
Mukul.
is, yeah. That is a good question, and I was actually trying to look at that data. You see, there is not much coming out of Sputnik vaccine data, whether it's from Russia or whether it has been given to their other satellite countries. If you may. But if you look at the vector is almost the same, but AstraZeneca uses a chimp adeno virus, while Sputnik just uses a cold adenovirus. So there is a slight difference. Again, Sputnik has tweaked its adenovirus vaccine. See, the first vector carrier for the first dose is slightly different from the second. I personally feel that maybe it is to do something with the chimp vaccine, which is probably in 1 in 100,000, 1 in 500,000, 1 in 500,000 is maybe causing the autoimmune reactivity between the vaccine and the P4 factor in the platelet, which probably doesn't happen with Sputnik. But Sputnik has other problems, and we don't know the data is. Sputnik use the same adenovirus vector, not the chimp, but the adenovector virus for their HIV vaccine trial. And then they found that the HIV actually exacerbated in a lot of those patients who received the HIV vaccine. So I still, I'm being skeptical about the Sputnik vaccine vector. So yes, it may not be associated with the thrombotic events. The event is probably not, you don't have the data, it's definitely less, but I'm more worried about exacerbation or antibody dependent enhancement, which may happen with Sputnik. We will know as more data comes out.
And if I can, Amish, sorry.
Yeah, go on.
One more question. So the coronavirus itself will cause thrombosis, but the Covaxin is a killed virus. And will it not cause the same sort of...
Covaxin, we are coming to Chetan. Chetan will come to Covaxin, and then maybe we can take that question at that point of time.
Yeah.
So this was on 24th of June. This was the article in the Defender that 13-year-old Michigan boy dies 3 days after the second dose of Pfizer vaccine. And Arndt says that moral, ethical, and health question need answers. Next slide, please. Dr. Venkat and Dr. Chetan, myocarditis post-vaccination in a 13-year-old boy and many similar young myocarditis. Are you worried? If assuming mRNA vaccine is available 1 month later and suddenly it opens up to 12 years and above, are you worried? Dr. Venkat first, followed by Dr. Chetan.
I won't be worried because, all vaccines do have side effects, and these have been reported usually in young military recruits after the second dose, about 2 weeks after the second dose, and most of them present with chest pain and they have resolved. So it's very mild, and they haven't shown any long-term efforts. So yes, keep it in the back of the mind, but the COVID is a bigger problem, and this myocarditis is a very rare event. So And we haven't shown, that it's more than the normal incidence in the society. And just because there's an association doesn't mean there's a causation. So we need more data.
We need more data. Chetan, most of them, that is the sentence which worries me. Huh? For a child who is 12, 13-year-old, most of them, it troubles me, honestly speaking. And Venkat, you also will know a 12, 13-year-old normal, healthy child coming and having these type of problem. Even in oncology, how commonly do we see myocarditis, pericarditis? We don't see that commonly. So, Chetan, would you agree with Venkat or would you be worried?
No, so what I would say is that we should create awareness so that these cases are caught and managed properly, rather than being worried and setting out a panic reaction among the people. So we can just say that monitor for these effects and seek urgent attention. Another point I would like to add is most of these patients whom we see these myocarditis are sports persons who have exerted, and that is the time they will have a sudden drop. But not many of us or many of our teenagers are going out at the moment and playing basketball or high activity sports. So it might be a mild case which might resolve on its own and go unnoticed. But certainly we just need to be aware of it rather than create a panic reaction.
So, Chetan, you bring out a very point, and I would like to bring in Dr. Khilnani sir here. The 13-year-old boy who died, there were YouTube video which I saw in the detail that he had issues after first dose also, which resolved. Then second dose was given and he was specifically told not to exert himself, but he still went on some cycling spree or some sporting spree. And after that, this event happened. Khilnani sir, even in AstraZeneca vaccine in adults, when we give, do you tell them that don't do any vigorous activity? I think we have covered this in another webinar also, but I would like you to reiterate this point again.
I don't think there's a recommendation of like this, that after the vaccination you cut down your vigorous exercise or marathon running. But certainly after COVID, yes. After, in a post-COVID scenario, we always, this is a standard recommendation for 6 to 8 weeks, no vigorous exercise, because people have dropped dead after the recovery when they go for heavy exercises, but not after the vaccination. Such kind of recommendation I haven't come across.
Sorry. Dr. Mukul, are you aware of any such advisory where after vaccination go slow for some time, or you can start running marathon from the third day onwards?
Okay, so as far as vaccination is concerned, now we do here, we've used Pfizer, Moderna and AstraZeneca both, and we have not categorically given any advice to any of those people who we vaccinated to stop their activities like running. Yes, with COVID-19 it is a different ball game, and I would just like to add in to what one of our panelists said. See, the episodes of myocarditis, which they said was found after vigorous exercise. Actually, the episode or the incidence of myocarditis in athletes is following the vaccine is much less than those who've had COVID-19. So they actually did a study called as a Big Ten athlete study, in which they found that the incidence of myocarditis in these athletic group was almost 1 in 45 in patients who had vaccine, which is much less than the episode of myocarditis, which is like 1 in 100,000 or probably even more. So you see, 1 in 45 had myocarditis. So I would be more worried about COVID-19 progressing down the path of myocarditis and pericarditis for that matter than with vaccine. And most of the vaccine-induced myocarditis that we have had have been very short-lived, temporary and self-resolving within
Absolutely.
a few days' time.
Next slide, please. I get your point. So Dr. Mukul has already spoken. I think you can cover sometime that why myocarditis with mRNA and why VITT with AstraZeneca, are they something specific? But let's move little bit and we can cover this little later. Next slide, please.
In fact, sorry, can I just come in for a moment? You actually raised a very very good question. Sorry, hello, yeah. So you see. In fact, what I it is actually very difficult to establish actual causal factor of mRNA vaccine giving rise to myocarditis, simply because you see there is no live virus there. There is not even a killed virus which is being injected. It is just a sort of genomic sequence in a lipo sort of protein type of nanoparticle. But you see myocarditis more often with so many other viruses. You can name all the viruses, enteroviruses and adenoviruses and hepatitis C and whatnot, which give rise to myocarditis. So I am still not convinced about a causal, a factor of actual mRNA giving rise to myocarditis. We still need more figures actually to come through to establish that. That was my point. I would be more worried about viral myocarditis. Thank you.
Let's switch gears a little bit. Khilnani sir, I'm coming to you only. So this question, which you need to answer, and this is related to young people also, will come to that very soon. Sir, when do you use neutralizing antibodies in your practice? We are talking of vaccine right now. We are not talking of COVID infection, sir.
So the antibodies test people do as a fancy thing, that you have got vaccine, you want to know whether you are actually protected or not protected. International recommendations are that you should not test yourself for antibodies, because they are one, that if you have antibodies, it doesn't give you 100% protection against infection, and the vice versa. If you do not have antibodies, it does not mean that you are not protected. It is the cell-mediated immunity which actually plays equal or more important. However, these antibody tests are used as a test for immunogenicity when you are conducting the scientific studies, where it is used for finding out. And other thing is that these antibody levels will wane off over a period of time. And we know that after 3 months they start waning off and they may not be detectable later. It does not necessarily mean the person is not immune to it. So at the cost of repetition, antibody test after vaccination is a big no-no for the either will make you euphoric or more worried. Both ways it doesn't work.
Right. Dr. Tarini, welcome back again. Tarini, what do you agree with Khilnani sir?
Totally. I have not tested myself for antibodies till now. So, and one more thing I've seen is it does make someone complacent. Once they have high antibodies, they feel they're protected, and the wearing of mask comes down.
Okay, right. So I am little tempted to ask yes or no to other panelists also. Dr. Chetan, would you do neutralizing antibodies post-vaccination? Just yes and no, and then we'll go to the details.
No.
No. Venkat?
No.
No. Dr. Mukul?
I would only ask patients to get antibody tested if they had a vaccine which was not approved by WHO and they were traveling abroad, honestly.
So vaccine when given and traveling abroad, that is the only time you'll ask for antibodies. Dr. Vishu, your clinical practice.
Or if they had COVID-19 disease, they couldn't have vaccine because they had not finished their whatever period of interval and they were traveling. Simple.
And they were traveling. So, Dr. Vishu, you have the antibody test in your lab. When do doctors ask for antibody test in a real world scenario? We talked, you listened to all the panelists. It was a big no that you should not test neutralizing antibodies after vaccination. Vishu?
Sir, even I don't test myself, and either my lab, you are aware, is marketing the same, that post-vaccination you should get these antibodies. And every time you and I have a discussion, I tell the same to you also, why do you need the test? In the real world scenario, the use of antibody test is more actually in recovered patients than in vaccinated patients. But one test, you can test once. That is fine to see that if there is a response or not. Hello?
So, I think...
am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I'll repeat that even I don't get myself repeatedly tested for antibodies in my own lab. Neither I market or recommend that to anybody. But, in real world scenario, post recovery from the disease, antibody levels are helpful. And irrespective of the number, it is the appearance of antibodies which is more important, whether the response has come or not.
Okay, Vishu, by the way, I have sent you my antibody levels for today, and you can post
Yeah, I
me.
have seen your level. I have seen, and last of this, and I
Okay,
didn't do mind getting intimidated by you.
no issue. So I don't agree with any of the people who have said so far, and I have some of my reasons for that. Let's come to that forward. Can we go to the next slide, please? So mixing and matching, the whole story of mixing and matching, let's discuss about that. Next slide, please. Dr. Mukul, can you throw some light on COMCOV1 and COMCOV2 trial, and then we again come to the neutralizing antibodies?
Okay, so this is interesting. So COMCOV and COMCOV2 trial. So this is what we started in the UK. I think the mix and match trial started on January 8th. It started in Oxford with one arm in Oxford, the other arm in Glasgow. So what they did was they tested, they had sort of people in 3 or 4 different arms. So one was patient who received AstraZeneca as the first dose, and then patients who received Pfizer as the second dose. That was sort of one arm. Then the second arm was people who received Pfizer as the first dose and AstraZeneca as the second dose, second arm. And the third and the fourth arm was again the same vaccines used as a first or second dose, but with different intervals. So they used a 4 to 8 weeks intervals and then 10 to 12 weeks intervals in the other arm. So that was the first trial. Now with the newer trials, which we have recently started since the end of May or June when Moderna was available, we are now mixing AstraZeneca with either Pfizer or Moderna. We'll soon have Novavax, so we'll be mixing that, and again we would reverse the order. So either AstraZeneca first or Novavax first, or Moderna first and then AstraZeneca second, and vice versa. So where does this all come from? Mix and match trials. Is it really good? So yes, we know what is called as a heterologous immunity boost, which we have seen very classically in those patients, who we give them hepatitis B vaccine, and then we check their antibody level, surface antibody, to see whether they've got enough antibodies or not. And we've realized that there are some patients who have very, very low antibody levels in spite of completing their, hepatitis B vaccine schedule, which is 0, 1 and 6 or 0, 1 and 2 if it's an accelerated schedule. Or there are some who are non-responders. So if you change the type of vaccine and use that as a booster dose, say as a second dose or the third dose, they have found that the actual response would enhance or go up. This has also been found in the trials for Ebola vaccine, where the mix and match idea came through, where the mRNA vaccine was first used. And then recently for COVID, the first kind of its trial was done in China. And that is an interesting trial in China where they had 4 different vaccines. I think they had Sinopharm and Sinovac, and then they had CanSino, which is like a single dose vaccine. So what they did was they used, so this CanSino uses adenovirus, which is a cold virus, just like Johnson & Johnson or Sputnik or AstraZeneca. So it used the first dose as a CanSino virus, and then they used a second dose using another vaccine, which was not a cold virus vaccine, and then they found that the immune response was much higher when they used the first as a cold virus and then second as, let's say, a mRNA type of vaccine. But if they reverse the order for some reason, which means if they used the mRNA as first and then the cold virus as a second, they didn't find the immune response as much. But moral of the story is, when you mix 2 different type of viruses, it probably enhances or it probably triggers different points in the immune system, and therefore what you get is a good overall immune response following the heterologous boosting.
Define this immune response. You define this immune response by the level of antibody?
Yes. So how do you define this? So we define this response, good question. One is by the level of antibodies, but not just binding antibodies, but neutralizing antibodies, for which you have to draw the serum from the patient and inject them into live viral cultures, and then you have to look for the inhibition of the virus growth in the culture. A, and B is there is a non-commercial assay where we use the T cell assay. See, because what a lot of us don't realize that it is not just the neutralizing antibodies, which as Dr. Khilnani sir said, they do wane over the time, but that probably is not the only marker of a good immune protection. You have to look at the T cell, because a lot of virus proteins are basically targets for the T cell, and luckily these epitopes in the virus which are target for our T cell do not mutate. So you don't have variants formed for the T cell protection or the T cell target. See, all these spike protein definitely mutates, and therefore it can give rise to a variant which times at some point may show an immune escape, but not the T cell. And the T cell memory is equally important. So we do have some, in our sort of siren trials or in our COV2 trials, we do use the T serum or the T cell assay, where we can actually measure the immunity based upon the T cell.
Great. Dr. Mukul, thank you so much for telling this mix and match. I have a very interesting chat box where there was a comment that mix and match is more of the political. Another thing is, yes, we do not have right now T cell immunity widely prevalent in all the labs. And Dr. Tarini Sahu has mentioned that neutralizing antibodies like pathological CR, which unless and until shows overall survival advantage, is not good enough. Khilnani sir, what is your comment on mix and match?
So actually, the thing is that my comment is based on today's reading only. So I have no personal experience. What was found is when the mRNA vaccine followed, the best response was with mRNA vaccine with mRNA vaccine. Second best response was Astra vaccine followed by mRNA vaccine, and the worst was mRNA vaccine followed by the Astra vaccine or whatever you want to call it. So this has come by majburi. The majburi was that you already given Astra vaccine to the people. Now the Astra vaccine is found somewhat inferior, or it's not available, or the duration is being prolonged, or there are more complications in younger people. So how to go about it? So you cannot give that Astra vaccine to the younger people. So you give them mRNA vaccine, which could be Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, and it was found that the immunogenicity was good, but not as good as Pfizer followed by Pfizer. So that's what I found. So I don't think we in India we have that. We don't have either Moderna or the Pfizer vaccine. So
Ms. Boss,
it will have a lot of relevance once these vaccines arrive in India, and beyond that, I don't have any knowledge.
Ms. Boss,
Yes,
I want to
Tarini.
make a point. Yeah, I want to make a point. Gradually, when the COVID thing started, I was also looking into this percentage 93, 91, 94, 78 very, very carefully. And then I realized ultimately it's all about the hospital admissions, severe disease, mortality. And if a vaccine can protect me from that, that is good enough. No vaccines in a randomized way has proven transmissibility to be less in a good way. So my point is the efficacy endpoint should be what we should be looking at the vaccine and the toxicity. These two should be the endpoints what we should be deciding when we choose a vaccine. Even for the Delta virus, Delta plus, if you look at the trials from UK told, even the AstraZeneca also the hospitalization or the severity with Delta plus with Astra was also good enough, equaling that of the mRNA vaccine. I think this immunogenicity is going the PATH-CR way, and we have not in oncology come to the endpoint. We still believe DFS and OS is the endpoint. So I think that is what it will be for academics, very good. For practicality, it is the hospital admission, severity, and the mortality and toxicity. That's what is going to take and decide.
Tarini, I completely agree with what you have said, and I also completely agree with Dr. Parekh, sir. He has mentioned in the chat that media is full of such stories. What I fail to understand, Tarini, is that assuming that majority of the healthcare workforce in ICU during COVID time is less than 50, which we all would agree. Today, we are looking at the endpoint as hospitalization, but assuming that we can derive a formula or a figure where this much amount of either T cell response or neutralizing antibody is associated with extremely less number of hospitalization and zero death. Tomorrow, when the new workforce comes to the hospital, you are going to employ that strategy. I refuse to believe why we can't see that. But anyway, this is my thought process.
Your point is very valid because you are putting this.
Yes,
No,
Tareq.
your point is very valid. Your point is very valid because you are putting to the quantum of the antibody generation to the hospitalization. Then it
Correct.
makes sense.
Correct.
But if the quantum is only just as numerical value and it does not give me a clinical benefit, there's nothing that's going to be achieved.
Absolutely, Tarini, I agree, and that is what I was looking at. And Khilnani, sir.
Sorry, I'm a great fan of Dr. Sahu. First, before I start commenting. So why we are vaccinating? We should understand that there are two issues. One, that the person should be protected from severe disease or the disease. That there I totally agree with Dr. Sahu that the Astra vaccine also gives the protection from the death or the severe disease, which is close to 100%. But there's another aspect of it we should understand. When we talk about efficacy of infection, when we say that Pfizer has 95% efficacy as compared to if you take Astra as 62 or 70%, that denotes the PCR positivity if you follow these patients up. If you have a larger people, suppose you take it, Astra vaccine as 62% efficient. If there's a larger people are getting infected, so that actually does not break the chain of transmission. The transmission will go on. If you have a vaccine which is 100% safe, it will, from the infection, I'm not talking about severity. So therefore, I cannot say it on the television, but in this forum, I can surely say that Pfizer and Moderna vaccine are more efficacious in controlling the disease in the community. That's my comment.
Right.
Can
and
I-
Tarini, you would be surprised to know that sir has always told me कि ये डॉक्टर साहू है कौन? मैं बोला भोपाल का राजा है वो.
But all due respect, I was going through it, and Dr.
Can I
Mukul
come-
can bail me out. Is there
Can
any
I-
data on communicability?
Yes, yes.
That is something that's lacking in a good way.
No, it's not. It's not.
Tarini, we are coming to that. Before Dr.
Yeah.
Mukul answers
Okay.
that question, can we move to the next slide and
Okay,
then I will
okay.
try to answer
Fine.
these questions.
Fine.
We have 15-20 minutes and we need to cover two important points. Next slide, please. Okay, now we have discussed this in detail. I don't want to create another controversy. Next slide, please. I personally think that mix and match can also be looked at reducing some of the side effects which we are looking at right now, and only the time would tell, but this is my personal opinion. And I think Dr. Mukul also alluded to the same, that by mix and match, at least one of the things we could achieve is reducing the side effects. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is where, Tarini, what you were saying. So this is the Nature Medicine article which I came across, and honestly speaking, Tarini, I read this whole once and I couldn't understand a single word of it. So I called Dr. Vishu Bhasin and asked him, do you understand this article? So neutralizing antibody levels are highly predictive, and I would again repeat to Dr. Khilnani, Parekh sir, Tarini, and all the panelists that the title is Neutralizing Antibody Levels are Highly Predictive of Immune Protection from Symptomatic SARS-CoV Infection. Next slide, please. And this is the graph where I would request Dr. Mukul to explain to us, because from here I got lost. Dr. Mukul, the 7 different vaccines, the neutralizing antibody levels were studied from the convalescent plasma.
Yeah.
That is what I understood. Now take on from here, please.
Okay, thank you. So you've given me the most complicated question, haven't you, Dr. Bora? But anyway, you see the figure looks extremely complicated, but I will try and explain it in a very nutshell, very simple. So they have used a sort of statistical model to find out, what is the half-life of the neutralizing antibodies. So if we consider 250 days as the total life, then they have realized the half-life of every vaccine of the neutralizing antibodies produced by the vaccine is about 108 days. Okay, and then they have said that after 108 days, the neutralizing antibody would start to decay, which means their levels would start to go down. Fine. Now, how does this affect us in the day-to-day practically? So, Dr. Sahu talked about how the vaccine protect against hospitalization, but we have found something else. We found here in our UK trials with AstraZeneca and with Pfizer and with Moderna that not only does it reduce the hospitalization and severity of the disease, it actually also brings down the transmission by almost 60%. And this is what we are looking at this graph for. You see, so if a vaccine has 91%, okay, 91%, now these neutralizing antibodies would actually prevent you from COVID infection. I'm not saying disease and moderate and severe disease. That is a completely different thing. If it prevents you from COVID infection, and if that effect would last for 108 days, you see, a vaccine which is 91-92% efficacious, then its half-life would start at a very high level. But a vaccine which is only 70 or 71% efficacious, its half-life would come down quickly. You see, already its efficacy is low than that compared to the 90, 91, 92%. So why is this sort of, this percentage efficacy is important? Because it will protect the person or the patient or the recipient of the vaccine against infection. And how does this matter? It matters because if that person is exposed to say COVID-2 again, after having had 2 doses of vaccine, the major problem is not hospitalization, but the major practical problem is isolation. These, say if it is a hospital staff, they go off duty. They have to isolate because they have tested positive, and then they don't come to work for 10 days. And this is a huge practical problem in every country, every hospital and every ICU. By using a vaccine which has got more efficacy, more half-life, you will realize that patients, even if they are exposed, will probably not test positive, or they will not be transmitting as much as someone who's not received the 1 or 2 doses of vaccine. And that is where this graph comes into play. So they have represented different vaccine with different half-life and efficacy.
Right. Dr. Mukul, so Vishu, if I have to sum up Dr. Mukul's statement, and I want to sum up the way I want to, even if it may be different from what he has said, it is the level of neutralizing antibody according to this paper tells us 2 things. One, when would they start decaying, what number? It has an implication in a day-to-day life in a healthcare sector. And second, it may decide also when the booster dose is to be given. Vishu, would you agree with this, or you have a different thought process?
I want to draw your attention to first thing, that this statistical model is based on vaccine development and not for clinical practice. Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hello. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
So this entire modeling is for vaccine development and not for clinical practice. So anything which is saying, it is saying I cannot help your patient, so I cannot answer with regard to that. Second thing, this is a highly assumptuous model based on what we saw in influenza vaccine, right? So its 250-day period is based on an assumption coming from influenza. However, it does not even currently it says that the protective efficacy is thought to decline by 7% per month. Okay, so it is thought to. So there is nothing much take home for me from this paper. All it says is that neutralizing antibodies have a role, and that there is a role of T and B cells also. But neutralizing have a role, that is the only thing it establishes, nothing else. So there is no clinical take home message from this paper for me, at least. But I have not been able to decipher.
Okay.
Can I just come in just a minute?
Just before you say that,
okay.
So I just want to ask Tarini and Parikh sir, that do you think that after this discussion, does neutralizing antibody have got any role in day-to-day life? Tarini first. Yes or no?
No. I also want to have one more clarity here. I have to recheck by this time because I could have missed, because I am speaking against a virologist. So all the trials, even the Astra, even the Moderna, looked at symptomatic infections. So the communicability comes through if you're looking at the RT-PCR routinely post-vaccinated at a particular point of time. Symptomatic infection will be different, but if you're not looking at asymptomatic and they are there, then this looks very different, and the efficacy is on the endpoint of vaccinated versus the placebo. So that is the person how we look at the efficacy. So how do you look at the community transmission part? Because none of the trials have looked into this in detail. And even I'm reading the article right now, this community transmission is still a big in a lurch. I'm not sure of the comments, but still I respect his views and I will read further.
No.
Yeah. So I am unclear. See, like Moderna. Like Moderna, if it is looking at only symptomatic COVID-19 infections, Astra asked them telephonically that symptoms, they looked at the RT-PCR then. How have we we would have missed asymptomatic also. And we know most of the COVID are asymptomatic. They could have been transmissions. That could have been transmitted because of that. So how do we look into these part of things?
Well,
I have a doubt. Yeah.
So Dr. Mukul, you'll answer that and then we'll move to Covaxin
Okay.
because that is next 10 minutes and to wind this up.
yeah. Okay. So yes,
Amish, can I just give my comments on this?
Yes, Farid, sir.
So when we look at the antibodies, there is one picture for the patient who's in front of us. And there's another picture for what is the government to do for the health of the nation. Okay. As far as an individual is concerned, looking at that antibody, neutralizing antibody as a protection has absolutely no meaning. But if I'm looking at the community and I want to decide what is going to happen in the third wave, which is the population that is going to be affected, where should I, allot my resources, which is the population that needs vaccination first, then the neutralizing antibody testing is important. I think we have to distinguish this two for the patient versus for the community and the health policy.
Excellent, sir. Thank you so much. So, Dr. Mukul, we have moved from no role to some role in the society. I would stop this discussion here because I think more data is required for this. Can we move to the next slide and next slide, please? Yes. So I'm not going to go into the further discussion of this. I wanted to create some more controversy, but I think we have discussed. Next slide, please. Tarini, you talked about this. Do you think that a particular patient receiving rituximab and antibody levels are 0, 0, 0? Two of my patients after one dose of vaccine and COVID infection, the neutralizing antibody in their serum was 0, 0, 0. Do you think mix and match policy may help in these patients, or you think it's too early to answer that?
It's rituximab, then for 6 months nothing will happen. All of us know. So we have to give that gap because they just cannot form the antibodies. So we have learned our thing now.
I know, I agree. And my answer here also, Tarini, I agree with you today for the first time, 100%, that I don't think anything is going to work in rituximab. We have to be careful there. Next slide, please. So last part, Khilnani sir first and then our pediatric oncologist and Dr. Mukul. Sir, which patient would you suggest Covaxin over other vaccines?
Which vaccines you are talking about?
So, we right now, according to me, in India, AstraZeneca is available, which is manufactured by SII. Moderna is available, and maybe next 2 months or 3 months, mRNA may be available. We don't know.
Sputnik also.
That is Russian Sputnik. Sorry.
So, see, my choice is very clear. If the Moderna or Pfizer is available, my choice would be Moderna or Pfizer #1. I still can't say anything to choose between Covaxin and Covishield vaccine. Both are equally efficacious and equally safe or unsafe. Of course, these thrombotic events we have not seen with Covaxin. If you talk about experience, we have more experience with the whole virus killed vaccine as compared to the adenovirus vaccine. So initially I used to say that both are same, probably because of the lack of knowledge. But today also I am not sure which one is better. As far as the efficacy is concerned, both are same. On the safety front, I will put Covaxin ahead of Covishield vaccine.
Okay. So before we go to our pediatric oncologist, Tarini, what is your take on this?
I totally agree with Kalyani sir here,
Thank
because
you.
I think what we are
Thank you, Dr. Sahu.
Khilnani sir has praised you. Now you are saying you totally agree with
no. See, that's the point. The only thing I want to say is, whenever the Pfizer comes in, I think government should reserve it for the children. This should not be allowed adult to vaccinate, because that's only one vaccine, probably till we get the Indian one. That is something which I seriously think.
Okay.
No, but Sahu, the thing is that there is a trial going on with Covaxin.
Yes, sir.
2 to 18
Yes,
years.
sir. But that is September to October. We expect the result. We probably expect Zydus to come in by next month. We expect Zydus to come in.
Another Chinese vaccine which is being tried for.
Yes, sir. The first thing will be Zydus, which is expected to release the results by next month.
Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, Dr. Venkat and Dr. Chetan, is Covaxin the way forward for children? And as Khilnani sir rightly mentioned, that we have a whole inactivated killed virus vaccine platform for rabies, Japanese encephalitis, pertussis, seasonal influenza. Pediatricians are so used to this platform. Dr. Venkat and Chetan, Tarini felt that Pfizer or Moderna should be reserved for our children, which constitute 18% of our population of India today. Dr. Venkat first and followed by Dr. Chetan.
I would say that, I'm quite surprised, because kids are the most vaccinated people in this world, and they get so many vaccines, and people are not scared giving MMR or, oral polio, which are also have associated a lot of side effects. So why so much hesitancy for COVID vaccines? So I feel this trials for Covaxin, Covishield should have been started quite before, probably simultaneously with adult patients. We cannot recommend any vaccine till we have clearance from the government. But yes, I don't favor either Covaxin or Covishield, whichever is available for my patient and is approved, I'd use. If the Pfizer vaccine comes, since it's approved in children about 12 in the US, I would use it. But I have no specific this thing. I think all of them should work in children.
Dr. Chetan.
I feel it is important to vaccinate the masses more than choosing what a vaccine might be more appropriate. The thing is that even though the efficacy might be slightly different or the toxicity is minuscule, we should still go ahead with recommending whatever possible vaccine is available to go ahead and vaccinate the masses first.
Right, Chetan, great. So Chetan, Dr. Parikh sir has mentioned in the chat box that mRNA vaccines were tried when too much of variants were not known to the mankind. And Covaxin, there are some studies on Delta and Delta Plus also with other variants as well. So if the Pfizer is available in India, would you go with Covaxin or what would be your choice of vaccine in children?
So again, it will all depend on how the data comes out for children. I think if all of them are equally priced, then I would prefer the mRNA. But if it is going to come at a higher cost, I would still recommend whatever vaccine is available, you should go ahead for that.
So if all are equally priced, Chetan, you talked a very important thing. You would go for mRNA vaccine. Is that correct? Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
Okay, this is very interesting. Dr. Venkat, you would agree with Chetan that if all are equally priced, you would go with mRNA versus whole killed inactivated virus, which is known to mankind for years together?
I would go with the whole killed virus.
So we have 1 + 1. Dr. Mukul, you're just whole killed or mRNA for children?
There aren't any trials for children below 12, if that is what we are talking. And since we have no data, if it comes to vaccinating them, whole kill, good old, tried and tested n number of times.
Great.
Definitely.
3 + 1. Why I'm saying 3, Chetan? Because Dr. Parikh sir also will go for whole killed virus. Khilnani sir and Tarini and Vishu.
I'll go with the majority.
मुझे पहले तारिणी को पूछना चाहिए था. तारिणी
कोई तो सपोर्ट करो मुझे.
If it is to me and I'll expect, let me see what I'll give my children. I think I will go for Pfizer. I'll support
Pfizer. So we have 4:2. Vishu.
Sir, I'll go with the Covaxin. I'll definitely not go for mRNA for long-term studies are not known. Whole killed is known for years.
Okay, so 5:2, and I also would go with whole killed vaccine. Pfizer mRNA is a new technology, completely new technology. Probably it's a different way of producing vaccines. I'm not very sure about it. So I
Can
also
I ask a question?
yes, sir. Please go ahead.
So Professor Luc Montagnier has made a startling and controversial statement that anybody who got the mRNA vaccine will be dead in the next 2 or 3 years. Comments of the panelists on that.
Let us start with Khilnani sir first, and then Dr. Mukul. Khilnani sir.
So my basic knowledge of basic science is extremely poor, but our microbiologist colleagues at All India Institute that I am in touch with, none of them are in favor of mRNA vaccine, saying that ये हमारे system को क्या करेगा हमें पता नहीं. So if I go by that, I totally agree that with children, you don't want to give a new thing. But efficacy wise, of course, mRNA, as I said, is superior. So therefore, that anxiety is still there, like the myocarditis. And the fact of the matter is that with Covaxin, despite being low on efficacy in terms of 77.8%, the safety and the time-honored experience of so many vaccines is so good that one tends to feel that this is a safer bet for. I'm revising this thing. I don't know what is the question, but one is always skeptical about mRNA vaccine as to the long-term consequences on our body and our genetic makeup. But
right, sir, you are absolutely right. So, Dr. Mukul, what Dr. Parikh sir said, in fact, in our school group, there are only 2 people who have not vaccinated themselves. And when this article came, they told that, look, Amish, we told you. You see, both people are working with autistic children post MMR vaccine. And I have tried to tell them time and again that it is so minuscule. You are not seeing how many lives are saved with MMR. But, so what do you say? All people who have taken mRNA vaccines are going to die. Should we start looking for job in USA?
Well, now to be honest, I think however intelligent and however intellectual that person is, at some point, and this is only my perspective, people want to be in the limelight. People want to hog limelight. People want them to be covered by the media, and I think you see, we don't know much about mRNA vaccine, so it is very preposterous to make a claim that anyone who's received mRNA vaccine is going to die in about 2 years' time. Now, I think there is a lot of undercurrent there in the statement. There is a lot of politics involved. There is a lot of pharmaceutical war involved. You have to see who this person has been associated to, which pharma company he has been working for. So there are a lot of issues here. As far as I'm concerned, I think mRNA is just a simple genomic sequence which is being put in a lipoprotein particle, a nanoparticle which is injected inside. It only carries information for the spike protein 2 of the virus, and that's all. It does not attach in a way to the nucleus of the cell. No, it does not. It does not alter the RNA and DNA of your own of the cells of the person who receives that. It only is taken inside the cell, and it acts as a template for the immune cells to produce an antibody against it, and that's all is the role.
Amish boss, on a lighter way, just shift the Tokyo Olympics by a year. India will top the charts of the medal because USA, Europe is all gone. So we will be the winners.
So I would end this discussion and would request Parikh sir to conclude. But before that, my special thanks to Dr. Mukul. You being a virologist, you have shared a lot of interesting points about which we only read theoretically, and sincerely thank you so much for giving so much of this
Absolutely.
thing. And Khilnani sir, again, I love you so much that I would want to learn every day from you and all other panelists. Over to Parikh sir to conclusion of the entire webinar as well, sir. Wish you sincere thanks. You are my friend. I don't have to thank you. But thank you so much for being on this panel. Over to you, Parikh sir.
Thank you very much, Amish. This has been definitely one of the most lively sessions that we have had in the entire webinar series on COVID and cancer. With a heavy heart, we say that we will, close this whole series today. But that does not mean that we will not continue with our educational and teaching activities. And we will get back to you as soon as we make a firm plan. As Amish said, Tarini, Khilnani, and Mukul, along with Chetan, really made this very lively, and Venki has really given his true insights into the whole discussion. And all the recordings will be available on YouTube, so that anybody who has missed out can go back to and refer to them when they have any specific point or issue that they want to refresh themselves. Once again, on behalf of my co-program directors, Dr. Tarini Sahu and Dr. Amish Vora, I thank from the bottom of my heart each and every one of faculty over the last 24 webinars that we have had. And we would definitely love to have any feedback that you may have, so that we can do a better job in the future. Thank you very much, and over to the event managers.